Hey everyone, it's Catherine with Colorado Yard Care, and today I wanted to talk about whether or not you can reuse potting soil from the previous year or the previous few years. Well, to understand the answer, we have to talk about what potting soil is. It actually doesn't contain any soil at all, so a better term for this would be container media. And the reason why people have developed different types of potting soil or container medias is because people like to move plants around. So whether you're buying a plant from a nursery or you're having a plant in your house as a house plant, sometimes we just want the ability to move plants around and rearrange them or grow them in areas where we don't actually have a patch of soil. So horticulturists over the years have developed container media to be able to grow plants in pots. And what happens is if you take soil from an existing landscape and you put it in a pot, what happens is you end up with a bottom layer of the pot that is very waterlogged, and you end up with the top portion of the pot that ends up being very dry. And that's not an ideal way for plants to grow. And the reason for that is when a soil is in a natural environment, it has the ability to drain because you have capillary action pulling the water from all the different pores in this big volume of soil that allows that soil to have a much better balance of air and water throughout the soil profile. And so that's why soil works in a regular environment. When you put a regular soil inside a container like this, you don't have all of those pores that are connected to this volume of soil pulling the air and water through the soil profile. And that's why you end up with this layer of very waterlogged soil and very dry soil. So to overcome this challenge, horticulturists have developed all sorts of different formulations for media that would grow plants better in pots. And they've used a wide variety of materials like peat moss or compost or coconut coir to create a better material that would hold air and water throughout the whole entire height of the pot. And sometimes they add sand and they add nutrients. Maybe there's also perlite or vermiculite in these types of container media. And the result is that because you have a better distribution of air and water throughout the whole entire profile of the pot, you get a root ball that can function very well and fill the entire pot. And the bigger your root ball is, the bigger and healthier your plant on top is going to be. So because these materials don't actually contain any soil, they are primarily made of some sort of organic matter, like I mentioned, peat moss, coconut coir, or compost. And because they're made of organic material, they tend to decay over time. When you buy potting soil or container media, when you open the bag, at that moment, that material inside it has the right particle sizes to get a really great distribution of air and water throughout the pot. And as time goes on, then that material decomposes and those particles shrink. So after a year or two, what happens is you're going to end up with a container media that has shrunk in particle size, and it's going to compact inside that pot. And you'll end up with that container media not draining as well, and it will hold more moisture, maybe than what's ideal for your particular plant. Now, the challenge that we have is if you're doing a lot of containers with plants in them, it can get really expensive to buy many bags of container media. In an ideal world, it would be best to purchase new potting soil or container media each year. That's going to result in the healthiest plants. But if that's a challenge for you, let me show you a few tips that you can use to stretch that potting soil further. If you're planting a plant in a pot that has a pretty good sized root ball, it's best to use new potting soil in that situation because the volume of potting soil that you're adding around the root ball is pretty minimal. However, if you're putting in a smaller plant in a larger pot, then you're adding a lot more volume. So what do you do in that situation? So one option is to add your reused potting soil to the bottom third of the pot and then add new potting soil for the top 2/3. The other thing you can do if you've got a really deep pot that you want to plant is put in some objects that just take up some space. So for example, in this case, I'm going to be using some of these smaller 2.5 inch pots just to take up some space at the bottom. Keep in mind that you need to fill at least the depth of the root ball with potting soil, or If you're planting a larger shrub or something in a pot, you probably need at least a good 12 to 18 inches of just potting soil for that plant to make a really good healthy root ball. So you can add some of these in there and then add your potting soil on top. And you can use anything that basically just takes up some space for a low cost, like cups or old nursery pots or whatever works for you. And then you can put your plant on top of that, and then you're minimizing the amount of new potting soil you're having to purchase and use. If you choose to use some items in the bottom of your pot, make sure that you're leaving enough space filled with just potting soil so that your plant can grow a big, healthy root system. Depending on the depth of the pot that you're using and the size of your plant, I don't recommend filling more than half of the pot with things that will take up space. The more valuable the plant, the more likely I am to use new potting soil. If it's a really expensive plant that I want to make sure is healthy in a pot for several years, I will definitely kick down the money for new potting soil. If it's a plant that I'm just going to have for a temporary basis, like I'm potting up something that I'm going to plant out in my yard, or it's an annual flower pot that I know is only going to last for a growing season, then I might go ahead and try to stretch my potting soil further through the two techniques that I've talked about. I don't recommend mixing new potting soil with old potting soil to kind of stretch that new potting soil further, because you're just going to change the whole particle size distribution of your potting soil, and then you're just kind of reducing the effectiveness of your new potting soil. So layering it is fine. Putting some items in the bottom of the pot to take up some space is fine, but don't mix the old and the new together. So that's some information for you about reusing potting soil. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.